All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Happy Halloween to everyone. I hope you guys have fun plans for tonight. We're gonna actually shift gears a little bit today. We've been working on our retreat, and today we're gonna stop and take a break and work on some lighting, because before we can get into the really high quality interior renderings, which would be our next kind of piece of the puzzle, we need to add some lighting, and we're gonna be working with lighting to kind of work through things. I just got a good message about you guys like my mustache. So this is Halloween for you, right? We're, as a family, we're dressing up as the Addams family. So I need to be Gomez Addams. So guess what? The stash has got to be on. It was pretty entertaining. We're playing around with it yesterday, trying to get it just right. So anyway, you get it for one day and then it'll go away, but whatever. Anyway, why not, right? So here we go. Let's get started on some Rhino, shall we? Let me share my screen there. Perfect. That's actually funny. You guys saw it and noticed it. Everybody in the first class, I think they were all too asleep. They didn't even pay any attention. Or maybe they just, turned me on and muted me or something. Anyway, so today we're going to talk about lighting. And the truth is that lighting is really one of the more fun things that we can do in V-Ray and ultimately in Rhino. And it's really what enhances everything and what it makes when it starts to really look good. So like I said, I shared my screen. We're in exercise 220 today, and we're going to start prepping for your assignment 205, and we're going to kind of start thinking about assignment 204, which will be about light fixtures. So all of that's kind of coming down the pipe, and today we'll cover the basics. And one of the challenging things about lighting and light fixtures in Rhino and or V-Ray is that we have to kind of create the light fixture, and then we also have the V-Ray light that pairs with it. So we're going to start first by talking about the geometry. And this geometry is whatever is going to be holding the light. And I'm going to do that in a brand new file in Rhino. So let me go ahead and double click on Rhino here, and we'll get started. And we'll let that get loaded up for us. Let me close out the V-Ray toolbars here. I'll also mention that I've been having some difficulties with the remote desktop this morning. It's just a little bit sluggish. So hopefully it's resolved itself by now, but bear with me as we go through it. So in this, we need to concentrate first on the geometry that's going to hold the light fixture itself. And so this is, you can think of it as if like you went to a lighting store and you bought a light fixture. Okay, that's great. You need to put it in your house somewhere, and that's going to hold the light bulb, which actually provides the light. We're doing the same thing in Rhino and V-Ray. We're building the fixture, the physical object first, and then we'll put it into our scene and then put a light bulb in, essentially. So how do we create this light fixture in the first place? I'm going to build a variety of light fixtures today and show you kind of how I would go about creating them. And then ultimately, you'll do your own kind of creative take on it. The most simple light fixture that we'll use a lot and is very, very common in house lighting is a recessed light in the ceiling, or a can light. It's basically a light that's hidden in the ceiling that when you turn on, it provides light for a particular scene. So we're going to actually create that light fixture geometry right now. So I'll start with just a circle here. I'm going to start at 0, 0 in space. There it is. And I want my diameter, so I'll type D for diameter, to be 4 inches. And my units are in millimeters, so that's why everything's off. So let's do a new large object inches. My mistake here. We'll do new large object inches. There we go. And then we'll go ahead and create the circle. Let's start again at 0, 0. And our diameter is going to be 4 inches. And there's our light fixture, or the beginnings of it, right? So let's go ahead and double click here. I'm going to create a little bit of trim that goes around this light fixture. So I'll go ahead and do an offset. And my distance, let's do it at 3/4 of an inch. Something like that. Now I can actually extrude these two pieces together. So I'll select them both, and I'll type extrude curve, extrude CRV, There it is. And I want to make sure that this is a solid object. So I'm going to click the option for solid, and I'm actually going to extrude it down. So we'll say negative 0.25 inches because I want it going down. And of course, it didn't pay any attention to me and didn't go negative. So let's switch it into shaded, and then I'm going to have to move it down. So let's move V for vertical. And you know what? I need some snaps turned on. And we'll drop that down. Now, the reason I'm doing this upside down so that it's hanging is because this is ultimately hanging from the ceiling. So I want to create this little bit of trim to go on the ceiling to hang down. So I want it to be flat on top and extending negative below. So we could also kind of enhance this a little bit. We could do a fillet to round the corner. So I could do a fillet surface. And let's do a radius of, I don't know, 0.125. That would be 1/8 of an inch. We'll see what it looks like here. And so we'll fillet that piece to that piece. And there it is. Alternatively, we could do a chamfer, SRF, chamfer surface. Our distance here, this is on the inside, so we'll also do it 1/8 of an inch. That's good. And we'll go from there to there, and that just kind of bevels it out. So I'm just tweaking my settings a little bit like that. Is all of this super critical? Not really, right? But we're going to do it nonetheless. So then we come to the dome, the light fixture part of the dome here. And I would do that. You could just do it as a flat sheet, but in reality, I think it would be better if it had a little bit of a bulge to it. So I'm going to use this one, which is an ellipsoid. And so we'll click on that. It's going to ask me first for the center. Well, I know that the center point would be 0, 0. I could also turn on my center snap so that I could snap to the center. There it is. It's going to ask me for the end of the first axis. So let's go to there. And end of the second axis, we actually want to flip over into kind of a vertical direction here. And now you can kind of see it growing. And this, I only really want it to be maybe 1/8 of an inch. So I'll type 0.125 inches. And we'll draw it about like that. And then my other axis, we need to come back over to right there. And you can see that it created kind of like a little pillow. Part of it's down below. That looks like the lens of the light. And part of it's up above here. We don't care about this upper piece. So for cleanliness, I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And I'll do that by just using a surface. And then I can use that to trim. So we'll select it. I'll type trim. And we can get rid of that little piece there. And then we can get rid of this whole surface. So what we end up with is just that little bit of lens there and the trim that goes around. So you can see that I'm spending some time in creating this geometry that holds the light, but not the light itself. So the geometry is always important. So let's get this a little bit more organized. Let me go into my layers here. I'm going to change the default layer to be called can light. I'm going to call it can light -4 because it's a 4-inch can light. And then let's create a sub layer for CL-trim. Actually, let's call it CL4 trim. And let's create another sub layer for CL4-lens. And we'll take the lens. Not sure why it's divided into 2 pieces. And we'll put that on the lens layer. And then we'll take the rest of it. It'll be easier if I just turn it off. We'll take the rest of this and I put it on the trim layer, change object layer. So you can kind of see where I'm going with this. Obviously, this is going to end up becoming a block reference. but I want to make sure that this is nice and organized. So layers 1 through 5 here, I don't need them anymore, and we can go ahead and delete those. And so I'm left with a can light 4, and then a CL4 trim and a CL4 lens. So let's start thinking about materials on this particular light. Let me open my V-Ray asset editor, and you can see that this is kind of a mixed bag today. Oops, V-Ray is not my current renderer. Let's change that. Let's go to render, current renderer, V-Ray for Rhino. There we go. Now I can open my asset editor. And if we look over to the left on this drawer, we're going to be looking for our materials. Well, first off, on our lens material, or excuse me, our trim material, we'll probably want some kind of white. So you could do it in metal if you wanted to. I'm going to look at plastic, and I'm going to look at a white plastic. And we'll see there's plastic white. Let me right click and say add to scene. Now I have the plastic white installed in the scene, and I will go ahead and right click on it and say apply to layer, and it's going to be the CL4 trim layer. So the nice thing about the plastic is I don't really have to texture map it, so we're happy with it the way it is. But the last piece of the puzzle, and you can see this, is that when we look at a light fixture and there's a lens on it, in this case, the can light, and so if you were to look up at your ceiling at a can light, for example, you would discover that when it's on, you'd see the lens kind of somewhat illuminated, kind of glowing. And so we need to create a material that represents that glowing material. And in V-Ray, that material is called an emissive material. And so we're actually going to create that emissive material from scratch. I'm going to click on the Create Asset button here. And under our materials, I'm going to choose, instead of generic, that's what we've always chose. Instead, I'm going to choose emissive. So the point of the emissive is that it's supposed to glow when turned on. And you can see by default, it's kind of glowing. So let's rename this emissive material to be bulb or lens or something along those lines. Actually, let's be consistent. Let's call it lens. And then we have to go through our settings. Now, I do have some settings already written out. I think they're on this. There it is, emissive material. I can load that up here, right? We have an emissive color, we have an emissive transparency, we have a diffuse color, and a diffuse transparency. So let's start with the emissive color. It's red 200, green 161, and blue 82. So color, let's click on the color. It's white by default. When I do red, green, and blue, I'm going to change this range to be 0 to 255. Okay, so my red was, of course, I'm not going to remember this. My red was 200. So let's change the red to 200. Oops, there it is, 200. My green was 161. And my blue was 82, I think. Yeah, 82. Perfect. So that sets my color. It looks a little ugly, but that's okay. Set the color. We'll get to the intensity in just a second. We're going to look at my transparency. And if I made that correct, let's see here. Transparency is all 100s. There it is. And we'll close that. So I have a transparency. Now I also included the diffuse color. I don't think we need to worry about it. It should work just fine. The other piece of the puzzle here is the intensity. And this is how strong this light's going to be. Right now it's set at 1. We're going to bump it up to 100. And you can see that now it's starting to really glow and turn on as if it were a light fixture. So now that we have the lens material set correctly, we're going to right click on the lens material and say apply to layer, and we're going to put it on the CL4 lens layer. And so now we have our materials installed. We'll go ahead and save this file. I'll go to File, and then save. And we'll put it in a folder for today. And we'll call it CL4. And I'll go ahead and click on save. So this is now ready to be used in an actual scene. So of course we could take it and we could put it in our retreat, but we're not quite ready for that. We still need more time to explore. So I've given you a sample night environment to try out your light blocks. It's down here at the very bottom of our exercise 220 page. I'm going to right click on it and say save link as, and I will save it into today's folder. There we go. And I'll go ahead and click on save. That's the sample night scene. And then let's go ahead and open that up. So I'm leaving my existing file open and I'm opening the sample night scene that I just downloaded so that it's a separate file. And there it is. And so what I've given you is I've given you kind of a generic night scene. The settings should all be set for rendering. So let's go ahead and dock my V-Ray toolbar. You can make this big. And so really what we're concentrating on is installing the light in this scene. So I have it as a block reference and I'm going to need to bring it in, but I can help myself out a bit before I bring it in by creating a line that just goes across the ceiling here, and then I can snap to it in the middle. So I'm just kind of helping myself out. So let's go ahead and bring it in. I'm going to go to Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. And I'll browse for that CL4 light that I just created. So let's go into my live demonstrations here. That's the wrong class. And so this is CL4. And we'll go ahead and choose open. There it is. Remember, we're going to link it with a reference file structure. We'll say OK. We'll say OK again. And if I have midpoint turned on, I'll be able to snap this right to the middle of that scene, like that. So if I adjust the camera angle just a bit and I were to render this, we'd be able to see that light fixture. And if I did the emissive material correctly, we should see that light fixture start to glow. So as you can see in this render, this is the emissive material is glowing, creating that little bit of light glow, but it's not really casting much light into the scene. And the truth is that an emissive material isn't really designed to cast a lot of light into the scene. We will use an emissive material creatively in a bit, but for the most part, it's not really designed to mimic how light enters a scene. So all we get is the glow of the light fixture. But it is important. If we didn't have the glow of the light fixture, we wouldn't visually be able to see where the light is coming from, and the rendering wouldn't look as realistic. So given that information, now we need to play around with our V-Ray lights in this particular scene. So thus far, we've only used the directional light and the sun light. Now we're going to start to play around with some of the other lights and what their settings are. So the one that works really well for a can light or a recessed ceiling light is this one here, which is called the spotlight tool. So we'll go ahead and create a spotlight. But before I do, I like to separate my lights onto a different layer. So I have a lights layer that's already active on this file. I'm going to create a sublayer, and we'll call this can light. Like that. I will make it active. And then I'll come up and click on the V-Ray spotlight. So when I click on the V-Ray spotlight here, it's asking me for the base of the cone. So I can actually use that center snap, just like I did before, to snap the base of the cone to the center of the light fixture. There it is. Now, when it comes to radius and diameter, right, I want my radius to be 1 And I'll experiment and show you what the differences are, but I'm going to start with my radius of being 1 foot. So I'll type 1 apostrophe and then enter. And then it's going to ask me for the height or the end of the cone. Well, in this perspective view, it wants to go around. It doesn't want to go straight up and down. So it's actually better to switch out of the perspective view and work in the front view here. You could also work in the side view. And I'm going to type 1 foot here as well. So the radius is equal to the height in this scenario. So there is the spotlight that I just created. Now we have a slight problem, and that is that the spotlight is actually inside of this roof. So we need to move this down so that the point of the spotlight right there is actually just below the light fixture itself, like that. It doesn't have to be right on top of it. We just need to be close, right? So you could get really specific and get in there, but this is actually close enough for our purposes to light the scene. So let me double click on render 1. And now we have to work through the settings of this light because the settings haven't been set just yet. So if we click the light itself, and this is the V-Ray spotlight, and when we go into our properties, you can see that we have light properties that are here. So a couple things. One, we need to adjust the color. The color right now is just white. And so we're going to adjust the color. And the color that seems to work really well is an RGB value, so red, green, and blue value of 255, 214, and 170. And I've done this enough times to where I actually remember those values, 255, 214, 170. However, if you can't remember them, don't worry. They're written out here. 255, 214, 170. Those are the values of the V-Ray light. So we'll come back to my V-Ray, I hope. There it is. 255, 214, 170. And we'll go ahead and say, OK. There's our light. Now, we have the ability to adjust the intensity. And we also have the ability to adjust the units. I'm going to move this over just so you can see this a little bit better. And so the units right now are in what is called scalar. We don't want that. We want something that's more used to what we're seeing. And that's radiant power, or watts. And I like this one because people have a tendency to have a kind of a general understanding of how strong a 40-watt light bulb would be, how strong a 60-watt or 100-watt would be. And so in this case, by using radiant power, we have an easier time estimating what this value should be. So I'm going to set this a little bit lower. We'll go at 40 watts for right now. Our cone angle and our penumbra angle, we'll leave those as the same that they are right now. And so we have this basically set up. We can make some more edits to it. Notice that there's an Edit in V-Ray Asset Editor button. If you were to click on that, there's my spotlight. And if we open the drawer to the right, there are even more options that are available to us. So the basic options we've already adjusted. The other thing is the decay should be set for inverse square. It's set like that by default. It didn't used to be, but it is now set by that by default. So I'm not going to worry about it too much. And so let's go ahead and do a test. And a lot of V-Ray and lighting conditions is to just jump in and do some tests. So you can see now, when I cast the light, that there is actually a light in the scene, and it's mimicking as if the light was coming from the center of this little roof overhang. It's casting a nice little cone on the wall, and it's casting a circle down on the ground, which is what the light would look like if we had that kind of a light in this scene. Now, the geometry of the light and the intensity of the light can both be altered. So first off, I can take this light and I can say, instead of 40 watts, I want it to be 100 watts. And then when we go back and re-render it, you'll see that the whole thing is much, much brighter. It's because I increased the intensity of the V-Ray spotlight. Now, what about if I edit the geometry of the V-Ray spotlight? So I don't like to use the cone angle and the penumbra angle, though you could adjust them here, right? So for example, I could come in here and adjust the cone angle down, and you can see that it's getting a little bit narrower. I could also adjust it so that it's getting wider. And actually, for my demonstration purposes, this is probably easy enough to do. So we started at 45. That was our base place. If I make it half of 45, so 22.5, you'll see that it's going to get a lot narrower. Actually, let's make it even narrower than that. Let's go down to maybe like 15. Okay, so it's getting narrower. Now, when I render it, we will get much less light bouncing on the wall. We don't get that arc as much. It's much closer. And the intensity of the light is much more like a spotlight or a flashlight, where you have a small cone of light, and it's a little bit more intense. So this cone angle really adjusts what the light looks like. So let's change that cone angle again. Let's go up this time and make it really big. That's too big. So let's say maybe, let's try maybe 90. So it's really wide this time. And now we'll come back and we'll render it again. And you can see that that arc is much higher on the wall, and the light tends to fall off very in a broad circle. We get much less of a defined circle on the ground. So it's your job as the designer of this light fixture to determine what this should look like. How broad should it be? And so there's usually some kind of a happy medium. I tend to start at 45. And when I do that, this tends to be the result. And I kind of like the way it looks. But again, it's relevant to you to determine what you like. So don't just do it because I'm doing it this way. Think about what that cone angle does and how it shines for you. Okay, so now we have this light installed in the scene, and we can go ahead and perform a render and save it. Okay, so I could come in here and I could save it. Let's start looking at some of the other lights that we might want to create. So I'm going to jump back over into a new Rhino file. So let's minimize this for right now. We'll minimize our can light, and we'll open up Rhino to create another file. Perfect. I'm going to go to File. Oops. Let me close the V-Ray toolbars here. There we go. I'm going to go to File and then New. And we're going to choose that large object inches template. All right. And this time I'm going to draw or create a light like a floor lamp. Now we can do a wall lamp, we can do a floor lamp, and this is where there's all kinds of light fixtures. And you're going to go home, or many of you already are home, and you're going to look around and say, well, what light fixtures can I mimic? Right? So let's say I want to do a floor lamp. So we could start with, let's do a cylinder here at the bottom. I'm going to start at 0, 0. Oops. Helps if I can type correctly, 0, 0. And I'm going to do a D for diameter, and we'll say, I don't know, this is a foot. And our height here, we'll say this is 1 inch. And I don't remember whether I made it solid or not. Back to shaded and let's see. Yeah, it is solid. Okay, perfect. So then let's use our basic shapes here. I'm going to do a cylinder again. We'll snap to the center. And my diameter is going to be 1 inch. So we'll type 1 inch. And my height, oh, I don't know, we'll do 5 feet. And now I've created the base of the light there. And then at the top here, I want to create a shade. So we could come in here. We could do, for example, this truncated cone. So the base of the truncated cone, let's go ahead and snap to the center. Right there. I'm going to end up lowering this down a little bit. Our radius, let's do it the same as the bottom. So let's do 6 inches. That didn't look right. Hold on a second. I think I'm back in space. Let's try that truncated cone one more time. Make sure I'm snapping to the center. There we go. Diameter of 1 foot. Perfect. Our height will go up 1 foot again. And our top here, let's do it at 8 inches. And there's that. I want to move this down a little bit. So let's go to move, V for vertical, and let's go down, I don't know, 2 inches. That was up. Let's go down, V for vertical. I should have typed -2 inches. Sorry. So we'll go -4 inches. There we go. That's down. Now I don't want there to be a top and a bottom to this cone. So let me go ahead and explode it. And we will delete the top there. And we'll delete the bottom here. Now I could put a light bulb inside here, but in reality, I'm not going to see it because the shade's kind of covering it. I could also get creative. I could add a little bit of trim around the top. So I could get, like, say, a circle. And let's do, that is way too big. Hold on. Try that one more time. Why is that so big? Well, now it's supposed to be 0.125. Apparently, I can't type. Diameter, 0.125 inches. There we go. Right, so I want to rotate this up into its position. So I'm going to do a rotate 3D. Alternatively, I could do a gumball. But again, that is whatever you're comfortable with. Come on. Let me turn off center snap because it's messing me up here. I'm going to hold down shift to jump to 90 degrees. And then I could dupe the top edge right there. And guess what? That is a sweep. One. My sweep shape is this piece right here. And there it is. And I now have that little bit of trim around the top of the shade. And I can do the same thing down at the bottom. So I could take the piece here, the curve. Let's go ahead and copy it. And this is, I'm going to turn that center back on. There it is. And we'll put it down there. And then once again, I can sweep one. Oh, sorry, I have to duplicate the edge first. So let me type dupe edge. There's the edge. And then I'm going to do a sweep one. And that's my cross-sectional curve or my sweep shape. And we'll say, okay. So you can see you can embellish this and add those kinds of extra little details along the way. So once again, now that I've created this lamp, we need to start organizing it so that I can bring it in. So let's go ahead and go to File and then Save. And let's make sure we're saving this in my OneDrive here. And we'll go ahead and call this lamp. And I'll click Save. All right. Now let's organize our layers. So we can change the default here to be lamp. And then we probably need a sublayer for base. So let's call this lamp dash base. And we probably need a sublayer for lamp dash shade. Perfect. So let's take the base right here. We'll put it on the lamp base layer. And then let's take the shade and put that on the lamp shade layer. And then for layer 1 through 5, let's go ahead and hold down shift and let's delete all of those layers. And now we've got a nice clean file. Let's save it again. Perfect. And now it's time to assign materials to this one. So I'll open up the V-Ray asset editor and we'll start looking at materials. So for the base of this, maybe metal is a good option. So let's look at metal. Now let's try this dark gray anodized. I'm going to go ahead and right click and say add to scene. And then I'll right click on the material and say apply to layer lamp base. And again, that's not wood, so it doesn't really require texture mapping right now. So we're okay with that. The next piece is far more tricky, and that is the lamp shade itself. So we need it to become kind of semi-transparent. So we can try one of our fabric materials. So if we go in here to fabric, we don't want carpet. So let's see what we can do. A curtain material might work. And again, this will become a little bit of experimentation on our part. So let's come up here and let's use the curtain, this one here. We'll right click and we'll say add to scene. And then we'll right click on it and say apply to layer shade. All right, so that's been applied there. Let's go ahead and save this file. I'll go to File and then Save. The only concern I have is that this is too transparent. So we may need to come over here and look at the opacity. It looks like it's okay. Oh, we've got translucency here. Let's see. Material non-translucency. So this may need to become a little bit more opaque. Let me do this slider here. See how it changes. Yeah, it's a little bit better. Maybe about like that. But again, we'll have to experiment and try it out. So let's close this. And then we'll do File Save one more time. Perfect. And then let's jump back to our base right here. So this is our sample 19. And now it's time for me to bring in that light. So I'll go to File, or excuse me, Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. There we go. I'm not bringing in the CL4 anymore. I'm actually going to bring in the lamp. Say Open. It's again going to be linked as a reference file. Say OK. Say OK again. And I'm going to snap it right there. So its height is correct. But I need to move this in front of the wall. So let's go into Move. And I'm doing this in the top view. And then I'm going to move it over. So maybe about like that. Okay. And so now I have the light fixture in front of the wall. And if I were to render it, we have the light from above, but there's no light in this at all yet. So we could go to render. Let's just take a look. And there's my lamp. And I may need to texture map that lampshade. Depends on the fabric. Okay. So now that I have that in, let's install a light. Well, in this scenario, our basic spotlights aren't really correct because the light needs to go in all directions. So instead of using this basic spotlight tool, we're instead going to use this one, which is called the point light tool. So we can go ahead and click on the point light tool. And sometimes this is actually easier to be in ghosted mode or even in wireframe mode. So we can kind of see what's happening here. And I want to snap it so it's sitting right on top of this post. So let me come in here. Center is turned on. We're going to snap to the center. There it is. And there's that little light, point light. I don't want it to be down all the way to the bottom. I want to actually raise it up vertically. So I'm going to type in move, V for vertical, and we'll move it up by like 6 inches or so. So let's say maybe 6 inches. There we go. So it's a little higher. Yeah, let's move it back down by an inch. V for vertical. Let's go -1 inch. There it is. So just like we did with the spotlight, though, we need to adjust the settings of this light. So we'll come over here in the color. We'll change that first. This is 255, 214, and 170. There we go. Again, our units. Oh, let me say okay, sorry. Our units are going to be in radiant power. And the rest of these should be fine. We'll double check in the V-Ray asset editor. There's my spotlight, and it is inverse square in terms of decay. That's good. So let's get back to our render 1 view here. Let me go to set view, render 1. And then we'll go ahead and render it again. I probably should make sure that my new point light is actually on, we'll call this lamp. the lights layer for lamp. Let's go ahead and change the object layer. There we go. And now it's time to render it. Now we could choose to leave this light on or turn it off. So I could easily turn off the, oops, that shouldn't have been on that layer. Let's go ahead and change that onto the lights layer. There we go. And now I should be able to turn off, right, that can light there. And we could even take this light and we could hide it just for clarity. And then let's go ahead and render and see what happens. So I'll click on the little teapot icon and we'll have a look. So this is actually working out pretty well. So we have the light inside our shade. It's making the shade glow, which is good. And it's casting shadows on the wall where it's fully transparent and it's lighting the rest of it without. So if this seemed a little bit strong, remember we can always go back, select the light, go into our properties and say instead of 100, let's make it only 40. And then we can come back and we can render it again. There we go. And so that fabric ended up working pretty well. That was a bit of a guess on my part, but if we came back here just to confirm, what I did is I took the curtain A02, this one, and I increased the translucency value up to about there from where it was. And that seems to work out pretty well. So sometimes it's a little bit of trial and error to get it set just right. Okay, so that was this light. So let's go ahead and save it. And the last one that I'm going to show you is a little bit different, but people have a tendency to like this kind of a light. So I'm going to go ahead and go to new. We'll do a large object, inches. And we'll say, okay. And this light is going to be like a neon tube where we have a tube. So I need to first create the tube to begin with. So I'm going to use the text tool to create some text. And let's call this, I'll use my initials, GA, okay? And so Arial's fine, all that's fine. Our height though, let's make it a foot. Oh, it's in inches, there we go. And there it is. Now I need a cross section after I've created that text. So you can see where I'm going with this. Let's go ahead and create a circle here. And we'll do a diameter of, I don't know, a ½ inch. There it is. Now we need to rotate that again. So rotate 3D, or you could use the gumball if you're more comfortable with that. And I'll rotate that so it's standing up. Now in reality, because of these corners, I'm gonna have to rotate this. Sometimes it's easier to see it in the top view. I want it to be kind of at an angle there. So let's go ahead and rotate. And this is a regular rotate, not a rotate 3D. Let me turn off ortho. There we go. And we want it to go right about there. And now we can use that as a sweep. So I'm going to type sweep 1. My rail is that. My cross-sectional shape is this. We'll go ahead and hit enter. There's my seam. And there's my neon tube. So I could do the same thing here. I could take that curve, and this one's going to get a little funky because of all the rounded all the sharp corners. So I could, if I wanted to, round out all the corners. So let me do a fillet. Let's do a radius, sure, of 1. And essentially I could round all those curves together. Oops, that radius was way too big. Do a radius of 0.5. All right. So then I could take that same little circle here. We could copy it. And I could put it there. And in reality, I would probably need to rotate it just a little bit more. It's not too bad, actually. Rotate it just a bit more. About like that. I'm just looking for it to be roughly perpendicular. And then I can do my sweep again. Let's go into perspective. We'll do a sweep 1. And there's my rail. And there's my sweep shape. And there is my neon 2. I do need to do it up here for that part of it as well. So let's take that curve one more time. Let's copy it. And we'll drop it right there. And we'll sweep it again. Sweep 1. There's my rail. There's my cross-section curve. And that totally didn't turn out the way I wanted it to. Let's try it one more time. This must not have. Let's do a sweep 1. And there is my sweep shape. There's my seam. There we go. We'll go ahead and say it. Okay. Perfect. So now we have my initials set up. I think this one actually looks better because it doesn't have the sharp corners, but that's okay. So let's get this one set up to go on a wall. So I'm going to take the whole thing and I'll do a rotate 3D. 3D. Oops. And I'm going to go below our objects here. I'll hold down Shift to stay in proportion. And then we'll have it up. Let's go ahead and move it. Sometimes it's easier to move it from the top view. Let's move from right about there to 0, 0. And there are those 2 initials. Now I could get more embellished and I could add some little, holder things to hold it off from the wall. But for our purposes right now, this is going to work. So let's organize it. So we've got our light called neon. And then we could have a sublayer for neon dash tube. And I don't really have any other geometry. So then we'll delete all the rest of these. We'll make sure that these guys get put on the neon tube layer. Change object layer. And there they are. And so now we want to think about what color we want those lights to be. So we're going to go back into our V-Ray. We're going to create a new asset, and it's going to be an emissive material. So remember, this is like the lens of our light. And we'll start by picking a color. So we could pick a specific color. Remember, we can go into our color range here. And let's say that I wanted kind of a neon orange. So let's call that the color that I want. And we'll go ahead and close it. Our intensity is probably going to go up quite a bit. So let's try it at 100. Kind of see it glowing. We may have to adjust the colors a little bit. Our transparency was set at all 100s. So let's do this at 100, 100, and 100. There we go. And now we'll apply that to our neon material. So let me go ahead and right click on it and say apply to layer. It's going to be the neon 2. Now we'll see what this looks like and whether we like it when we get into the other scene. So let's go ahead and save this. I'll go to File and then Save. I'm going to call this one neon. We'll click Save. And then I'll jump back over into my scene here, and we'll put that neon on the wall. So let's open up my layers here, and we're going to bring in that neon light. So let's go to File, or excuse me, Edit, Blocks, Insert Block Instance. Going to click on the little folder here, and I'm going to choose neon. Go ahead and say Open. linked as a reference. Say okay. Default options here are fine, and we will snap to that corner. Then we need to move it. So I'll go to move, V for vertical, and we'll move it up, and then we'll move it over. So it's more in the middle of the wall like that. And then we'll go ahead and do a test render of this. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little render, and we'll see what it looks like. Now remember that these lights are casting light based on just the emissive material alone. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to capture the right amount of glow for those materials. It seems like it's a little bit too much, a little bit too bright. So what I'll do is I'll go back to my objects right here, and I'll go into my V-Ray, and I'll change this down to maybe like 50. And so we're adjusting that intensity down a bit. I'll go ahead and close it. I'll go to File and then Save again. And we'll jump back into here, and we should be able to go to Edit, Blocks, Block Manager. Our linked file is newer. Let's update it. And then you should be able to render it out again. Now, like I said, it's only coming from the emissive material. So in this scenario, we'd like to add a little bit more light to the scene. And so I'm going to do that by creating a light that, hold on, let's see here. I lost the render frame. Hold on. There it is. So we're still seems a little bit bright on the wall. So we, again, may have to make that adjustment. But what I can do is I can actually create a light called a rectangular light. So let me go ahead and switch into our shaded mode, so you can see it in shaded mode here. And I'll come over here to this light. We're going to cover the rectangular light in a lot more detail coming up, but I want to at least introduce you to the concept here. So rectangular light, it's going to ask for the corner first. Now this one's in a vertical format, so it's a little bit harder to create. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it in the front view here. And I'll create my first corner, just slightly larger than my initials. I'll create a length and go across. So that's a little bit larger. And then I'm going to go straight up to create that rectangle right there. So we want to make sure that it's not coplanar with an object and it's not inside of the wall. So none of these lights will work if they're inside of geometry. So if this light were inside the wall like that, it wouldn't work. So I need to make sure that it's outside of the wall. And you see that there currently is an arrow pointing toward the wall. That's the direction the light is going to cast. So let's create a new sublayer here. We'll call this one neon. I'm going to right click and change it to be on the neon layer. And now it's placed right, but let's go into our options. So first off, we need the color. Well, unlike the last ones where we did 255, 214, 170, this one we want it to be kind of orange. So we'll pick the orange color, say okay. Our intensity, we will again go into radiant power, and this is probably a lot less. So let's try 20. Unfortunately, not all of the light options are available here. So we do need to edit in the V-Ray asset editor. So there it is. And you can kind of see a preview of the orange light. So we have a couple things. So our directionality, see if we can do it there. Let's come down here. There we go. Under options, first off, we want to make it invisible. So we're not seeing this as a source of light. It's just casting light. Furthermore, we want it to be double-sided. So it's going in both directions. So the light's going toward the wall and away from the wall. And the rest of these options are all fine by default. Now that we have that set up, let's go ahead and render this out again. And unfortunately, it is shining on the wall so bright because it's so close to the wall. So let's make a few modifications to it. And this is where you can see that there's always modifications to be made. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip this light away from the wall. So I'm going to type flip, and you'll see that arrow will flip. be pointing away. So let's type flip. And now the arrow is pointing out toward us. And then I'm going to uncheck double-sided. So it's just pushing light out this time, and we'll try another render. All right, so now it's pushing that light away. I think my intensity is still too high on these, but if we back up a little bit, actually I need to back up to right about here, and when we were to render, you'll see that that orange light is being cast out a little bit more into the scene because of that rectangular light. Come on, let's render again. There you go. You can see the little dots, the orange dots being cast out here. Those will refine into a much better light condition. So that's how you would do some kind of a neon light. Okay, so they're all different types of lights. Maybe that needs to change into being a different color. That's again, the advantage of working with these. We could go in here and say, you know what? I don't like this anymore. Let's go back and let's change that emissive color. I'm going to change it to be blue. I'm going to drop the intensity down just a little bit. We'll go to 25 this time, and then we'll save it. All right. And then we'll jump over into our original file here. We'll go to Edit, Blocks, Block Manager. And we need to update this. And then we need to update our color for the rectangular light behind it. And like I said, we'll go over the rectangular lights in a little bit more detail later on. There it is as blue. And let's go ahead and render this out. And it didn't update. The blue light worked, but the emissive didn't update. That's annoying. Let's see if we can force an update. I'm going to move this slightly and see if we can get it to update. There we go. Let's save it. And if this doesn't work, I'll bring the light in again. I'll replace it. So let's go to Edit, Blocks, Block Manager, Neon, we will update it. And then let's render it again. All right, I'm gonna have to replace it. Blocks, Block Manager. What I'm going to do to force it is I'm going to go back to my neon. I'm going to do a save as. Call this neon 2. And then we'll go back to my original file. Here it is. We'll go to properties. Oops. And we're going to point it at neon 2. And that should update it for us. Let's render it again. And it does not want to be friends with me today. See if it's correct here. Oh, this shows you that stuff goes wrong for me too, right? So I realize now, I just looked at the clock, I'm starting to run short on time. Let's see, yeah, it's loading up fine here. So let's figure out what is up with this. Right, rectangular light's good. Yeah, that's where it's getting stuck. So let's just change it here to the blue. We'll change the value here to 25. This should have updated when it brought in the material, but for some reason it's not. So let me override it here. I want to open it up. Now it doesn't even want to render for me. How nice. Well, I'll let that one work itself out. There's a couple other tricks that you can do if the materials aren't coming in correctly, where you can delete the material and then bring it in again. But there we go. Now it's turning out in blue. So I apologize for those issues. Okay, so I went through a variety of strategies. The key here was introducing the concept of a spotlight, introducing a concept of a point light, and then the rectangular light, I like to throw in there just so you know it's there. We'll spend a lot more time when we get into the actual scene. I'll show you where I use the rectangular light so that you can see it kind of in practice. So at the end today, I want you to give me a render with your lights in this little sample night scene. That's all we need. And then next class, we'll come back and start working on your buildings again, and we'll bring these lights into your buildings. So as you create the geometry of these lights, think about where they might fit in your building and where you might want to use them. So I think creating a can light is always a good idea, because if you create the can light, it's pretty easy to adapt into your scene, but you might want a floor lamp or a table lamp or something like that. So don't be afraid to create those as well. All right. So with that, I will let you all go. Thanks for sticking around with you. I hope you guys have a great Halloween if you're doing anything. If not, answer the door and throw some candy at people. Anyway, I hope you guys have a good one. And obviously we have check-ins today. So we'll take a little 10-minute break, and then I'll start check-ins at, let's call it 12:30.